Hey everybody, welcome back to the Voyagecast. Today's episode is titled When Smart People Fall for Their Own Biases. I came across a post recently from an old professor of mine. This is like in the last 2 weeks. And out of respect, I'm going to keep her anonymous, not because I'm afraid to disagree, but because I still have a lot of respect for her. She was always a very sharp and thoughtful person and genuinely shaped the way I think about some of the psychology that I even use today, the way I've even considered integration of theology and psychology. And because of that, her words still do carry some weight with me. Well, her post was about the Charlie Kirk Memorial, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but she argued that there was some kind of covert influence or some kind of covert tactic being used to mobilize grief and anger in the audience. And she wrote, I'm quoting here, "The goal seems to be to weaponize the grief and anger of white Christians and to use it to further divide us." She went on to describe how trauma and grief can, quote, open individuals and groups to covert influences, end quote. And she suggested that those who organized the memorial, quote, again, callously used people's pain to try and manipulate the audience, end quote. At first, I read it, shrugged it, and just kind of scrolled on. I'm not one to spend much time on Facebook. But it stuck with me. Something about this just didn't feel right. So part one of this episode of our podcast today is just going to review what she claimed and what didn't sit right with me, to be honest with you. Her post laid out detailed list of what she saw as manipulation tactics. Now, some of you may be wondering, like, why is this all important and why does this matter? This can be related to anything in our life, any kind of service that we go to, any event, any relationship. She said that the memorial followed the, quote, standard protocols of neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, that pre-memorial worship altered states of people's minds, opening them up to influence. That if anxiety or anger increased during the event, that this was some kind of proof of manipulation, that organizers wanted people to associate Christianity with being hunted or unsafe. And her conclusion was pretty sweeping. Basically, any emotional response at all could be read as evidence of manipulation. Well, she mirrored the tactics that she denounced. Okay, that's the first thing that kind of hit me, was how the post used emotionally charged language, phrases like weaponized grief, callously used pain, quote unquote, which are powerful words. And ironically, they use the very technique she's warning against. Psychologists call this the affect heuristic. Our emotions become shortcuts for judgment. When you call grief weaponized, you're not just describing it, you're steering the reader's emotional response before they've even had a chance to think about it. Now, that doesn't make her a hypocrite. It makes her human. But it's worth noticing how quickly even thoughtful people can slip into the same kind of patterns they critique. Another thing she did, the second issue here, was issuing some kind of motive. She didn't just describe what happened. She claimed to know why it happened. Quote, they knew this. Quote, their goal was division. That's not really analysis, that's an accusation. In psychology, we know how common this mistake is. It's called a fundamental attribution error, assuming you know someone's intent based on your emotional reaction. If you feel threatened by somebody, they, quote, must have meant to threaten me, or something like that. I see this in marriage counseling all the time. One spouse will say something and they attribute motive to it in some kind of way. And the problem isn't asking hard questions about influence. That's fine. We should ask hard questions about influence. The problem is assuming certainty about someone else's heart or intent or motive. The third part here, I want to kind of pull back the layer on, and this is maybe a little bit more tender. It's a little more delicate. And it's the way that her words can carry a lot of moral and professional weight. And the way that they carry such weight is that she is a trauma survivor and she has a PhD in psychology. And that combination gives her perspective some kind of gravity. but it also creates what I'd like to call an authority shield. It makes disagreeing with her feel dangerous. Like if you question her reasoning, you're not just challenging her argument, you're invalidating her pain. And by the way, I see this in couples counseling all the time. If you question somebody's emotion, then you're invalidating their emotion versus trying to understand maybe the presupposition of that said emotion. And it's the appeal to authority mixed with the appeal to an emotion. And when those two things overlap, real conversation becomes almost impossible. And this is where like disagreement can get pathologized. Now, to be clear, she didn't personally do this necessarily, but it's a move that I see, the pathologizing of disagreement. In the academic world, in the news, in therapeutic spaces sometimes, it's where you treat disagreement as evidence that something's wrong with you. The logic goes something like this. If you don't agree with my framework, it's because you're traumatized, brainwashed, or in denial in some kind of way. And that's not really a good argument. That's more like subtle coercion, or like, it's going to sound harsh, but like a soft totalitarianism of the mind. You don't go to jail for disagreeing, of course. You just get labeled unhealed or under some kind of influence. But disagreement isn't a diagnosis, of course. Sometimes it's just a sign that human experience is bigger than your theory can hold, or other people see the world differently than you. And if psychology can't make space for that, it's not psychology anymore. Okay, psychology is a science. This is where things kind of lean from psychology to more like an ideology. Um, and I do find that in the psychological world, there is a lot of pathologizing of normal experiences. And she also described worship as, quote, an altered state that can be used by people with bad intentions. If somebody had bad intentions, they could use this sort of altered state to influence, manipulate, or whatever. Now, while that can be technically true, it's not the whole truth. Worship, music, ritual, they're not automatically suspicious events. They're really, truly ancient experiences and deeply human, and a way that we kind of metabolize grief or celebrate life and hold meaning together. Anthropologically, this is shown over and over and over through basically every culture all over the world in some kind of ritual, song, prayer, procession, whatever. These aren't manipulative tricks. They're how we remember kind of who we are as a collective human race. Psychology sometimes forgets that. It's gotten into the habit of pathologizing normal experiences, treating human emotion as if it's a symptom. I often find that like somebody will get a diagnosis of depression when maybe someone died. I don't know if that would be I mean, I guess technically it's fitting the criteria of a diagnosis, but it's not really a pathological experience. And not every tear is a trauma response. Sometimes it's just love doing what love does, or pain doing what pain does. And I want to get into this part about kind of the NLP, this neuro-linguistic programming. This feels very overstated. Her post claims that the memorial used this type of programming, neuro-linguistic programming, as a manipulation tactic. Now, that sounds maybe impressive, like someone figured out how to crack the code of people's brains. But here's the thing, NLP has been studied for decades, and the research is overwhelmingly skeptical. Multiple systemic reviews, Passmore and Rosen, in 2019, they did a major review, and even in 2014, a Canadian government report found little to no empirical evidence that NLP actually works the way that it's advertised. Could it work? Sure, but it's kind of a bold claim. Instant influence, subconscious control, rapid cures, they just don't hold up. So to describe the memorial as following the standard NLP protocols, as she stated in her post, gives the whole thing a kind of pseudo-scientific authority it really hasn't earned or doesn't deserve. This doesn't mean the influence isn't real. I mean, we can see the influence in the world. We can see radicalization of people online. We can see all that stuff. It just means we should be precise about what's influencing whom and how. Finally, her post divided everyone into kind of three major camps: the manipulators, the manipulated, and the enlightened, those who see through it all. This isn't just unhelpful, it's what logicians would call unfalsifiable, meaning that there's no way to prove it wrong, no matter what happens. Every possible outcome just reinforces the theory itself. If you feel sad, that's proof you were manipulated. If you feel angry, that's proof too. If you feel calm, well, maybe that's the manipulation working perfectly. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's a framework that cannot be tested. It explains everything, which means, in a way, it explains kind of nothing at all. And once a theory becomes unfalsifiable, it stops being science and it stops being logical. It becomes entirely an ideology. This kind of thinking deepens what psychologists call in-group or out-group bias. The critical or the critique implicitly tells readers, quote, if you agree with me, you're one of the enlightened. If you don't, you're probably brainwashed. That's not analysis. That's a tribal boundary that we can't cross. It's like a sacred cow or a sacred land. We can't touch it. And the tragedy is that this kind of framing shuts down any kind of dialogue before it starts. Once a group is labeled as the manipulated, their lived experience no longer counts as valid. They've already been dismissed, ironically, in the name of protecting people from manipulation. And the surprising part, the part that amazes me, is that such an intelligent woman, someone who I genuinely learned from, could be so easily swayed by her own biases to interpret the event in this kind of way. Her intellect didn't really free her from the influences. It actually gave her a sharper tools to defend it. That's the paradox. Intelligence doesn't always inoculate us from bias. Sometimes it just makes us better at rationalizing it, which is kind of amazing. So there is a difference between manipulation and meaning here. And here's what I think the conversation needs to be, or in a direction it needs to go. Influence itself is not bad. Every song, every sermon, every memorial, every conversation moves us somehow, somewhere. The question isn't if influence is happening, it's to what end is it happening? Manipulation uses emotion to obscure truth and hijack agency. Healthy influence uses emotion to illuminate truth and dignify agency. And you can't just determine because you don't like one group that it's manipulation, and because you do like another group, it's healthy influence. So ritual, music, shared grief, these are not just tricks. They're normal ways of humans being human. They're normal ways that we metabolize our reality when words alone can't really express it or hold it. So instead of asking, am I being influenced, we should ask, what kind of influence is this? Partly because you're always being influenced by something at any given time. And is this influence leading me toward truth, love, healing, or toward fear, toward division, toward some kind of control of the mind? Now, you may not even know that you're being influenced, and that's fair. Now, philosophy gives us these categories. Psychology, when cut off from philosophy, loses them and starts treating all influences as a type of manipulation. Now, why does this matter for us? Because many of you listening know what it's like to be dismissed. Not by a professor, of course, but by your own family, friends, even your spouse, your community even. You've said something from conviction, and the response you got was, well, that's just your trauma talking, or you've clearly been influenced, or it sounds like your mother. That kind of framing doesn't make room for honest difference. It doesn't say, I see it differently. It says something must be wrong with you because you see my point of view as different. And that can be really devastating because it turns our disagreements into diagnoses. And disagreement isn't dysfunction. Please understand. Grief isn't gullibility, and worship isn't necessarily weakness. If we start treating every emotion or spiritual experience as proof of manipulation, we'll lose the very things that make us human: our rituals, our communities, our capacity to love and be moved. So this isn't just about one professor's post. It's about all of us. In our marriages, in our friendships, in our churches, learning how to recognize when influence is healthy, when it's toxic, and how to hold our ground without assuming that disagreement makes someone broken. So here's my takeaway. I don't dismiss my professor's concerns at all. Influence is real, grief can be exploited, groups can be steered. All of that's true. But what unsettled me was the way her critique blurred the lines between trauma and expertise. It mixed valid insight with speculation, and it pathologized ordinary human rituals like worship and mourning. And I don't think it's fair to single out one event as uniquely guilty. Every memorial, every collective expression of grief uses some kind of emotional ritual and story to help people make sense of loss. That's not manipulation in the slightest. That's just humanity. That's just humans being humans. Now, I still value her, and I'm grateful for what she taught me. But her post was a good reminder. Even the brightest minds in the world, psychology, in any profession really, aren't immune to bias. And when philosophy and logic step out of the picture, even the smartest of us start mistaking our own reflections for the truth. Not a truth, not a perspective, but the truth. So my encouragement is this. The next time something moves you, a sermon, a song, a story, don't rush to ask, am I being manipulated? Ask instead, what is this drawing me toward? Is it drawing me toward fear or love, division, communion, despair, hope? That's the real test. Because influence isn't the enemy. Losing our capacity to discern, however, that's a real danger. All right, well, that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of the Voyagecast. If you like these episodes, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. The algorithm overlords need that to spread the good news and help people get this great information to help expand and develop our minds psychologically and apparently in a more human capacity. All right, take care, guys. Until next time, we'll see you then.